There we go. Thank you very much. I will try to speak a little slower. I think I wore out the translators earlier, and I apologize for that. I tend to get excited about security, and when I get excited, I talk a little bit too fast. So I'm going to talk today about ICANN's role and relationships and remit in a number of different areas, and so part of this presentation is going to be a description of ICANN and where we play in the security arena, and part of it is going to be a little deeper dive into some of the capability building that we provide. So if you look at my department, we are called the Internet Identifier Security, Stability, and Resiliency Team. And we have four major areas where we provide services to both the ICANN community and the Internet at large. And I make that distinction because ICANN's primary remit is in names and numbers for the Internet. We are not a governance body that has any sort of administrative oversight of the entire Internet. We don't have an on key, we don't have an off key, we don't control the cryptographic keys and the like. What we do is provide subject matter expertise in areas that are Internet related, such as the Internet of Things, such as virtual private networks, and other subjects that are outside names and numbers, largely because I have the really good fortune of working with several talented people who, like me, have 20 or 25 years experience. So we have a very senior team who have done all sorts of activities ranging from operational capabilities to consulting to protocol development and design to engineering, hardware design. It's a really fascinating team to work with, and I love all my colleagues for their breadth of knowledge, and we are sort of interchangeable parts, which makes it really good for us and good for the communities that we serve. So the first part of our sort of day job is threat awareness and preparedness. And we have two major functions within that realm. One is participating in what we call trust networks. These are other security professionals, operations people who work in domain name registries, in internet service provider operations, in major brand operations like eBay and PayPal and Amazon and Google, Microsoft. And what we do there is we spend a fair amount of time in collaboration looking at global threats. Threats where the DNS plays a prominent role. Places where domain names are used for phishing attacks, for command and control of botnets, for malware hosting and malware downloads, what we call drive-by downloads. So that's a very large part of my role in particular. This is something that is literally 24/7, and we work with law enforcement, with private actors, private sector actors, with other people in the domain name and internet registry community to try to identify and then mitigate threats. As part of that threat awareness, one of the things that we often encounter is a vulnerability in some domain name software or some kind of system that hosts domain name service. And we try to provide what's called a coordinated vulnerability disclosure mechanism whereby a researcher or a security professional who has identified a vulnerability, identified a problem in software, can contact us confidentially. We can connect that party with the vendor and facilitate a communication so that the researcher can pass along the exploit. The developer can look at the exploit, find a way to correct that problem, and distribute it. And this is what we often called responsible vulnerability disclosure. It's a very important facet of what we do, and a very, very important element of trying to protect people from harm by making certain that patches exist at the same time that a vulnerability is identified. Another part of what we do that is becoming a passion in my department extends over to the office of the Chief Technology Officer at ICANN. We have hired some really, really fine data researchers and people who are very well qualified to do analytics. And we are now looking at what we are calling the health of the Internet identifier system. How well is the name system behaving? How well is name resolution being satisfied for the billions of people that need it every day? So we are doing measurements at the root of the DNS, and we are going to do security threat reporting. We're building a platform that is doing a census of every TLD that we can acquire zone data from, and looking at the threat activity within each of those TLDs, within each of the registrars who are accredited to register domains in those TLDs. And we'll be trying to make reports not only to the registries and the registrars, but to the public that help people understand where the health is and where the unhealth is, so to speak, in the Internet's name system. We are also trying to provide, and this is a personal passion of mine, new metrics, new ways to actually measure health or well-being of the identifier system. And just right, for those of you who are developers or familiar with scripting, a lot of what we do is try to proof of concept some way to go collect data, look at it, and come up with some metric or some value that says that rank scores a number of different parties according to how healthy or how unhealthy they are in having a population of domain names that have been identified as phishing or malware or spam and the like. So that's a very exciting piece of our work now. We're probably at the 80% mark of delivering that, and I hope that if I come back here sometime next year, we can have a presentation or a talk that's focused directly on that. Another extremely important part of what we do is capability building. We have a number of training programs that we originally offered primarily to the country code top-level domain operators, and that extended to and it became so popular that we actually now have an organization, the NSRC, who is a contracted third party who delivers perhaps 100 of these kinds of training programs all over the world annually, and it's a very big part of our budget. It's a very big part of our commitment to trying to improve the capability, especially in emerging and developing countries, so that those countries have as much resilience and security and stability in their name resolution service as advanced nations. We also now we began in around 2013 a program where we provide law enforcement and other public safety communities with the ability to sit in a training that helps them understand how to do investigations into criminal or other illicit activities, and how the identifier systems, the names and numbers, can be used as a way to go and investigate various illicit activities such as phishing and farming and illegal pharmaceuticals and counterfeit goods, human trafficking. All those crimes, all those malicious activities have at their core some abuse of some identifier system. They either are using IP addresses, or they're using domain names or hyperlinks which contain domain names, on being able to understand how to interrelate all the information that is available publicly about those, those identifier system resources is a skill set that many law enforcement agencies seek, and we provide that through through a training program that I developed in 2012, and I now have 3 other people in my organization, one exclusively for Latin America, one exclusively for Asia Pacific, and recently one for Middle East and Africa. And then I'm currently flying back and forth between the United States and Europe, trying to cover both those, both of those regions. We are delivering about 75 to 80 such trainings a year. And they are at ICANN's cost. So this is part of our commitment to the public interest. This is where we are able to come and provide subject matter expertise and raise or build capability locally. Obviously, there's a huge demand and appetite for these kinds of trainings, and so we've begun exploring the possibility of working with local computer emergency response teams to do a train-the-trainer program. So as an example, in February and March of this year, I spent some time in the UK with CERT UK and ran 2 training sessions for their trainers. And now they are building up their capability to be able to do more training within the UK. Having me here today is an example of our global cybersecurity cooperation. We have a department in our organization called Global Stakeholder Engagements, and they help us visit countries, speak to audiences like you on a variety of topics where we have subject matter expertise. Most often we try to talk about internet names and numbers, but as I did this morning, there are some other areas of expertise where we're happy to come and speak on other topics. We also work with the global security and operations community. There's an acronym, OPSEC, that is often used. And these are daily interactions with people who are encountering problems, anything from illegal root injection into the global routing system to a botnet attack similar to the Mirai botnet that I talked about earlier. And we either share what we find with these collaborative communities and discuss what we found with them, or we consume some of the information that they have found to see if there's some other way that we can facilitate some form of mitigation. We also provide open source intelligence, information that we're collecting from DNS servers, from other data repositories that are public, like the Whois, and sharing those and making people understand how they can utilize them so that we can mitigate global threats. The internet abuse mitigation communities is a very, very large population of people. And this is a sort of Venn diagram that attempts to illustrate where ICANN intersects with some of these organizations and how these organizations interrelate. And this is very sort of complicated, but if you take some time to look at it, you see that the ICANN community is a fairly diverse community, yet there are so many other communities that actually work to try to mitigate global threats that involve the domain name system and the identifier systems, including private sector interveners, and some of them have a direct access to ICANN community. Some of them have direct access to the ICANN organization through my team. And it's quite a very large community. But it's not the entire community, because all of us, including consumers, are part of the victims of abuse. And so one of the things that I try to emphasize to people is that we should all be in this working together. We should not be feeling like our businesses are being threatened. We should not be feeling like there is a competitive benefit to not participating in threat mitigation, because it's costing us in some way or another. It may not be costing you directly in terms of what your revenue is, but it's costing somebody someplace, right? And we don't want to just simply spend our lives being victims. As I mentioned before, ICANN has a governance role there, and that is specifically within the realm of internet names and numbers. But we also have a subject matter expertise role. We have a number of people who are highly qualified and respected in our company, and we are perfectly happy to assist in investigations where identifier system abuse is prominent. And I mentioned some of those, and where what we can do, if not provide direct investigative assistance, is to facilitate interactions with various members of this investigative community. So this would involve helping investigate domain names, helping look at addressing anomalies, helping identify origins of denial of service traffic, helping identify servers or countries or companies under siege, and then working with either law enforcement or private actors or others to try to find a solution. So in the example of a denial of service attack, we may be working to help a private actor whose website's being attacked for a denial of service work with other ISPs to try to squelch the amount of traffic that is coming from their networks and attacking that particular party. We don't do a lot of this directly. A lot of it is collaboration. And a lot of it is, honestly, sometimes just a phone call saying, hey, do you think you could speak with this party here and maybe help them block some of the traffic that's emanating from your network and attacking theirs. So there's a lot of collaboration that is extremely important. We also spend a lot of time trying to explain to people how they can use and consume and apply publicly accessible DNS or addressing information to solve their problems, to further their investigations. And this is a big part of our role. One of the most popular training programs that we have developed over the past several years is a DNS Abuse for Investigators course, and the course is possibly half full day or multi-day training sessions, and we actually begin with sort of a very basic introduction to the domain name system and identifiers. We explain how the system works. We explain the whole ecosystem of the DNS and how, as a distributed system, there are many players and many parties who have roles in the DNS. And the training program is a combination of lecture, of demonstrations, and hands-on exercises. In the hands-on exercises, it's very, very common for us to simply go and find a domain name that we view as suspicious and walk through the entire investigative path to see what we can find. We have recently been very successful in working cooperatively with the regional internet registries, such as RIPE here in Europe, and giving multi-day training at Europol, at Interpol, and these are very, very successful, and they're very, very productive, because there's a whole world of things that we talk about for domain names, and a whole world of things that can be discussed from a regional internet registry perspective about addresses and routing, and the complement of those two is very powerful for investigators to know and to acquire. And so in some circumstances, we will work for 2 to 3 days on site with anywhere from 10 to 30 investigators, and it's literally a very high-paced boot camp. The typical syllabus of these courses is is one where we begin by explaining the domain name system, how names resolve, what the ecosystem is, who are the players, and then we talk about the different actions that can be taken. And this is probably one of the most important parts of the course, because there's a perspective often of what ICANN's role is with regard to domain names that perceives us to be a regulator, where we actually have control and we can turn things on and can turn things off, and explaining the actual relationships that exist in the internet and the complexity of those relationships and how that affects things like execution of court orders is a very, very important part of what we do. Okay. The other part of what we do is very much, what people call white hat hacking. We show law enforcement how to use tools to acquire information about the DNS, how to use tools to acquire information about hosting location, how to download and examine content, how to go and acquire other information that's related to the domain name, perhaps that began as your particular focus, and discover that there's a whole realm of or range of domain names that are also related to the activity that you want, and then maybe how to find the persons of interest in that investigation through looking at things like social media. Right. And that's a combination of tools specific to DNS and then other tools that are specific to various other forms of investigative research. One of the things that we do in this course is we try to model how to proceed in a investigation of DNS abuse or of domain name abuse after techniques that are very common to law enforcement. We talk about means, motive, and opportunity. We talk about the importance of not relying on one bit of information, but on a great deal of information. So the analog that's here with the fingerprint is very, very common to law enforcement. Law enforcement knows that if you find a fingerprint at a crime scene and you bring that fingerprint back and you look in the fingerprint database and you find a match that's only 2 or 3 minutia, that's probably not sufficient to say that I know categorically that this particular fingerprint that I found at the crime scene is the same as this one in the database. So this is my my perpetrator. Right? It's not as simple as that. In various courts of law, you have to have matches of 8, 10, 12 minutia in a fingerprint to satisfy the court's criteria. So we go through 8, 10, 12 kinds of matches of information that you can collect to explain or to corroborate your suspicion that this particular domain name and this particular party are in fact the perpetrators of a phishing attack. And so this is just a short list of the many things that we go and look at during the course of the day. And constantly throughout the course, we will reinforce that, all right, now we've found a recent domain registration, and we've found a suspicious value in the domain name zone. We've found a hosting site in a location that's known to host malicious content. We keep going through those iteratively and say, let's add them up. How much do we have? Do we have, is our confidence that we're actually looking at the right party high at this point? And if not, we continue. Okay. We explain how there various actions that you can take on a domain name have different effects and different consequences. And generally, when you read an article in the news about some sort of action against a phisher or against somebody who's doing ransomware or some other criminal activity, you hear the word takedown used. Well, takedown has a very different context than blocking something on a block list. That has a very different content or context than taking content off the internet, which is very, very hard in many cases. And so we try to explain what each of these means and what the consequences for each are. We also talk a great deal about the things that hinder mitigation or hinder prosecution of, of criminal actors. And one of the ones that attracts the longest conversation is jurisdiction. Jurisdiction is highly problematic in the internet because internet criminal activities are multi-jurisdictional, almost always. You have some parties in an Eastern European country and some parties in the United States and some parties in perhaps Latin America, but you may also have addresses where the criminal activity is taking place. For example, a denial of service attack that could be in 100 countries. So trying to actually understand how you orchestrate successful execution of one of these multi-jurisdictional attacks is exceptionally complicated, exceptionally important because it takes such a long time. And and further complicating this is that in some countries, what is considered a criminal activity is not considered a criminal activity in another country that's also party to, where there are resources that are party to that attack. And so it's very, very complicated in some cases, especially involving content, where in one country what the content actually violates a law, but in the other country it's considered freedom of speech. And so trying to make certain that we all are on the same page and we know what can and cannot be done, and is extremely important in understanding how we can be successful in closing cases. The other aspect that most law enforcement officers are not familiar with is the arcane system of contracts in the ICANN world. And part of the course that we have tries to explain what ICANN's role is in contracts, what the registrar's role is, what the registry's role is, whose responsibilities it is to take down a domain or suspend name resolution, and it's not trivial. It takes quite a bit of time to map this all out. One of the things that we do is we walk through the who, what, when, where, how of a takedown, of an investigation. And especially when we talk about multi-jurisdictional scenarios, these are very, very large, complicated interrelationships, often involving multiple law enforcement agencies, multiple court jurisdictions. Some of you may be familiar with what's called mutual legal assistance. Mutual legal assistance plays an important role in being able to have court orders that have been issued in one country, satisfied by a party in a different jurisdiction. So, for example, if there were a crime that was being investigated here in the Ukraine, and it involved or needed information from some investigator in the United States or from some company in the United States, a mutual legal assistance request might be necessary in order to serve a court order in the United States to obtain the information. And when you do something like that, what you end up with often is either a question of matching criminal law or mismatches in criminal law. And when you have mismatches in criminal law, then it becomes a lot more complicated. We talk about the different steps of investigating abuse, how you escalate what you know through the registration system, for example, of the ICANN GTLD or generic top-level domain world. We also talked about how you go and contact hosting providers and when you should do one versus the other. One of the big emphases of the course is to explain to most investigators that if you're looking at something on the internet, you're probably not alone. Often, people who are in the private sector are days and sometimes weeks ahead of law enforcement in looking at information, largely because law enforcement commonly needs a criminal complaint in order to take an action. Whereas people in the anti-spam world, for example, are monitoring traffic constantly, looking at email constantly to go and identify malicious activity. I'm not going to walk through this today, but what this slide attempts to do is illustrate the various relationships of different kinds of information, domain names, internet addresses, the zone data that map names to addresses, the whois records or the registration information for names and addresses, acquiring those through something called passive DNS, understanding the relationship of maybe one domain or one IP address that you have that might exist across dozens or hundreds of other names, how you can take handles like email addresses or even names or addresses or phone numbers and go and look into social media sites for the publicly exposed information and gather up further information about the resources or the locations or the profiles of individuals that you view as persons of interest. And this is a whole lot of fun, I actually have written an article about that walks through an example of this. If you're interested in that, see me and I'll give you a hyperlink. But it's also just massive amounts of information. So let me give you a quick use case, and this is something you can play with at home. If you go and you type quote no prescription close quote site :edu in Google, this says go and look at all the websites that you search for in the edu top level domain for the words no prescription. Okay, so if you do this search. In this particular case, you come up with about 68,000 hits, okay? And all of those hits are actually compromised WordPress sites. These are, if you remember my talk earlier about lax configuration, these are all WordPress blogs that have been deployed with default configurations that allow immediate administrative access to the web page by criminals. And so, affiliates for illegal pharmaceuticals that these companies that offer ED drugs or restricted use drugs like narcotics or cancer or blood pressure medications, much cheaper than you can acquire in many healthcare systems, go and exploit these, and they build pages to redirect to an illegal pharmaceutical company. So if you follow one of these, you might find a link like this. So HXXP, by the way, is a convention that we use when we share links with our colleagues so that no one can accidentally click on a link and visit something that we didn't intend them to visit. But normally it would be HTTP, and this particular link goes to Lindenwood University in Missouri in the United States. Okay, if you go to the home page of that site, you see this very common home page that makes the college experience look very exciting and inviting, right? But if you go to the page that's called Buy No Valdex USA, you find a shop online with us illegal pharmacy redirect, and there are links on this page that take you to an order procurement and fulfillment page where you can buy Novaldex and hundreds of other drugs and have them shipped directly to you from some manufacturer who is doing this illegally. So this is just the way that we actually do this. You can actually try this at home, and then what you'll end up finding is the web page HTML. You go and you grab the web page HTML, and you can find the link in the web page that actually identifies the legal pharmaceutical procurement and fulfillment page. And if you notice, it's an entirely different domain And this one, by the way, has already been taken down, but you'll find 68,000 new ones today, right? Because there are that many pages that are not administered correctly. So there's a good lesson here in just how bad lax configurations are. But this is how we go through investigations. And now the next thing that we would do, the next thing we would do in our training is we say, okay, let's find the IP addresses of this fromlocation.com. Let's go and find the name servers. Let's go find the whois records. Let's go find other names that might be associated with, with that name server or IP address, and we continue to work through. And this is one of the ways that we identify hundreds of names that are all associated with one pharmaceutical affiliate, and try to build a case to identify who that is, where they're making registrations, and see if we can find that person and serve him. Right? So that's just an example of some of the things that we do. The course is a lot of fun. If you are an investigator, we call it a fire hose of information in 8 hours, but it's also something that's quite worthwhile. So I'm done. If you have any questions for me, you can either ask now or you can talk to me during the break. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. This is a very interesting presentation. Do you have any questions, please?
I will be speaking in Russian.
I need a...
Dave, this was a very interesting presentation. Can you hear me, Dave? Dave, it was very interesting to listen to your presentation because there is a system in Ukraine that was built to record it's on channel 1. Can you hear me? Hello? Speaking in English. Hello? I am speaking in English. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Please. Hello, can you hear me? Dave, can you hear me? Yes, you can? Okay, great. Yes, you made a very interesting presentation. There is a system in Ukraine for recording any violations of authors' rights and internet content violations. We also have a special center and qualification center. And we have issued over 6 or 7 years. We have issued a lot of conclusions about our investigation of all the violations in the internet space. I was hearing in your presentation a lot of things that we are also faced with, and we can cooperate with you, all the more so because we have already started on the path to creating a network of these types of centers here in Eastern Europe, in the Commonwealth of former Soviet states. We have already signed memorandum with several countries, including Belarus. We would like to be involved with you within the framework of ICANN. How can we cooperate with you?
So thank you. There are several different levels at which I think we could have involvement or cooperation. There are a number of organizations like yours that are concerned with intellectual property rights, and there is a level of policy development and involvement at ICANN where there's an entire constituency or stakeholder party to our what we call bottom-up multi-stakeholder consensus process, and those people work on policy, for example, that prohibit cyber squatting or try to protect the intellectual property rights or brand rights for organizations and cooperate through WIPO. That is a policy level. I am way below a policy level. I'm more at ground zero. So what we do with our training is we provide kind of a baseline for investigations that are applicable to intellectual property investigations, but are also applicable to investigations involving human trafficking, or investigations involving counterterrorism, or investigations involving spam and phishing and financial fraud. There is a whole commonality of activity across each of these criminal, illicit, or state-sponsored activities in some cases. We tend to be agnostic in my team, because what we're trying to do is essentially provide the tools and equipment to choose, or that can be used for each context of the investigation. We're happy to share those with you, and we have a lot of resources that we make available. But there are also trust communities that we're involved in that perhaps we can introduce you to, where there's other people like your organization who are facing the same problems, and happy to do that offline. Did I answer your question, or yeah?
Все?
How we can engage it in your activities
How can
within ICANN?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I will email you.
Еще вопросы? Пожалуйста, Оксана.
Oksana Prihodko, European Media Platform. Your slide on the role of different constituencies within ICANN involved in ensuring security. I didn't see internet users and at large. Well, maybe just as victims only. So aren't these issues important for at large? Do you think that this has to be changed, and that internet users have to be more active in ensuring cybersecurity and in your organization's activities?
Absolutely. The users in particular tend to fall, within ISOC's purview, the Internet Society's purview, and my slide was kind of political in the sense of I didn't want to step on other people's toes, but I'm also a member of the board of directors at the Anti-Phishing Working Group. And within the Anti-Phishing Working Group, and ICANN is a major contributor, we have an entire program called Stop, Think, Connect. And Stop, Think, Connect is a in fact, you're going to have a talk immediately following mine, is one of the many activities that tries to raise global user awareness and capability in local languages. And so it's a very, very good program. And so part of what we do from my team's perspective is we participate in those. We provide subject matter expertise in helping understand how you teach people to avoid ransomware, as an example. We do a great deal of publishing from my organization too. So at the ICANN blog or my own blog, we write about different kinds of crimes and different things that people should be aware of. It certainly was no intention to omit at large. I thought I had it on the slide, so I'm sure that at some point I covered one bubble with another and forgot to change the color. But yes, at large has a very, very important role. So,
Еще вопрос?
Do you have any more questions? Hello, I'm sorry, Daniel Demchenko, a registrar in Ukraine. I have a question. I heard from your presentation that the main issue is the brand names used as domain names. We used to have issues like this, and here's how we defended ourselves. We created a block list, included all of the brand names used by pharmaceutical companies, and that way they weren't able to register those with us. Right, but you were talking about creating a ban on the registry level, and if someone does want to register a brand name, they would have to have written authorization from the domain name. Would this be a way of protecting yourself? So here's my question. Let's say there is a list of brand names, right, protected. Is there a way to include those brand names in a block list so that neither registrars or registrants wouldn't be able to register those as a top-level domain?
So it's a great question, and it's like everything else has a multiple part answer. ICANN has a trademark clearinghouse where trademark holders actually can register and identify strings that should not be registered. So at one tier, that you're satisfied. What we do see still, even in those cases, is two kinds of domain name or hyperlink compositions that incorporate a string that is familiar with users, and we find that a lot of behavior of users, especially I'm going to have to use an English string to illustrate it. Users tend to find what they're looking for when they look in a hyperlink. So if they see the word Apple anywhere in the link, they're comfortable that it belongs to Apple. Now, Apple.com is a registered domain name, and Apple is a protected trademark. However, apple.xyz214.com looks fine to some users, okay? And that's outside of the delegation boundary of a registrar, okay? Preventing that is very, very challenging. It's even more challenging when someone goes and compromises a website. Let's say they compromise my site, securityskeptic.com, and they put a subdirectory. So it's securityskeptic.com/Chase, CHASE, which is a bank in the United States, /login.html. Unbelievably for me, but obviously it's true. In phishing attacks, that is a very, very successful way to capture a user's attention. They don't look at anything else, but they see Chase, and they say, "Okay, this must be Chase." So there's a lot of user behavior that as I said, having at large and ISOC and APWG all on the same page explaining these differences is extremely important. And so yes, we can have block lists, and in fact, many organizations have massive infrastructures, or they hire people called brand protection parties, and those brand protection parties will actually go through every new domain name registered on a daily basis, and they run heuristics, and they run to try to match and find the brands, or brand infringements in domain names wherever they are, at whatever level of delegation. eBay, for example, and Apple have between 150 and 200 people whose jobs are just that, right? So it's a very, very large and challenging problem, and there's no simple solution. And as a registrar, you probably know that there's a lot of different ways that you could attack this. Some of them are extremely expensive or hard, and they may not necessarily yield a good result, but people think that they do. And I think one problem we need to address is how do we step back and make our policy more mitigating at the beginning of a registration cycle than after something's been actually registered. But that's just something that that is going to happen evolutionarily, not necessarily because we see it in one way today.
Спасибо. Еще вопрос? Да, тоже на русском языке.
We have another talk. Yeah. Well, the other talk time. Yes.
Hello, Tatiana Delinska. I have the following question. It's about the part where you were talking about, let's say you have information that you've already collected, right? And how do you find the people who did committed those violations? And I know that these days there is a trend among criminals where they exchange information in the deep web, right? So it would be interesting to see what you think about this, what information you have about this.
Okay, so the question.
Right. So deep web, right? Have you studied it? What is this? What can you do to combat it? Have you had examples? There is dark web, that's even lower, but there is deep web, right?
So we don't talk a lot about deep web or dark web in our training. It is in both of those kinds of communities, and in other underground chat rooms or other underground communications forums. The typical way that those are used, whether it's by private actors like myself or by law enforcement, is finding a way to be accepted into the community. And often what you have to do is build a trust relationship with someone who is part of that community and get invited into that community and then become part of the underground marketplace. Try to buy credit cards. Try to identify or acquire or lease time on a botnet. And you have to have some creds. And so the people who are credibility and the credentials. So the people whom you initially contact are people who are going to test you. They're going to try to see if you actually fall into that community. I don't have time for that. I mean, there are lots of people that I could introduce you to who are really good at that and very skilled at pretending that they're 14, pretending that they're a 14-year-old pretending that he's 22. As an example, I'm too old to actually pretend that I'm 14. But the goal of that kind of investigator is to build personal relationships. Ultimately, an awful lot of police success, an awful lot of investigative success in acquiring and identifying a person of interest to the point where you could get a subpoena and serve someone and prosecute them comes down to them making mistakes. You would be so surprised to see how often people who are very successful in hiding themselves everywhere else in the world make too much of themselves on Facebook or on another social media, and they do it publicly, not even within their own community. And so a lot of the typical police, the same things that police do in the real world, in terms of turning someone to be to reveal information about a friend, or of finding information that people have left, little bits and crumbs, in a paper trail, are present in the internet, and it takes a lot of time and skill to actually go through that. And if you are curious more about that, contact me, and I'll put you in touch with a couple of people who'd be happy to share how that's done. But it's just police work, and it's funny. You tend to think that police work happens in these microseconds that the television shows suggest. Police work takes hours, days, weeks. Finding little bits of information is very, very challenging. And I always hate looking at something like crime scene investigators, television shows, because they make it look like everyone is a technical wizard, and an awful lot of what we end up using to find the real people behind the attacks is the same kind of social engineering that they've used against us. So.
Thank you. Two more questions.
Kiran, doesn't it seem to you that it's time to involve organizations like United Nations so that countries sign treaties what is criminal and what isn't, and based on that we just disconnect the countries that don't sign the right agreement and stop doing technical things when we can just solve it administratively?
Wow. That might actually happen in our in the United States in the next 4 years, but I think that's a bit draconian. What we are trying to do in legal instruments, such as the Budapest Convention from the Council of Europe, is establish a worldwide acceptable definition of various online crimes. And then once we have a baseline and universally accepted understanding of what those crimes consist of, having those embedded in laws across all nations. Okay, that would be great if we had a baseline so that what was a computer crime in Ukraine was also a computer crime in, let's just shoot for all the Interpol countries, 160 plus countries. Life would be much easier. The second thing that we actually need to do, and I recently wrote an article about this with Dr. Steve Crocker, who's the chairman of the board at ICANN, is accelerate the process of due process. I firmly believe that what we should be doing is respecting due process and understanding that due process is truly no different in the internet world as it is in the real world, except that it happens faster. So solving the problem means we need to be faster in mutual legal assistance, but still abiding by due process and constitutional rights in different countries. I think that's achievable, and there are actually precedents in things like derivatives markets where you can see these tribunals that have been set up that have an accelerated path where some electronic submission form is available to an investigator. Evidence is submitted, the allegation is submitted, that gets processed by experts very quickly, and the experts pass off their information to a tribunal of judges who decide whether or not it's this is a crime or it's not a crime, and everybody agrees who's party to this whole tribunal system. Let's say 160 countries, yes, and they act on it. So instead of a mutual legal assistance process of 6 months, you might have a mutual legal process of 72 hours. And I think that that's achievable. It's just that it takes an awful lot of cooperation, and the hard part is getting the cooperation to scale.
Thank you. Спасибо большое всем, кто задал вопросы. Хочу обратить внимание, что завтра у нас